Everyone I worked with called me Danny. Danny Coulter, a forklift operator at a freight depot in Allentown, Pennsylvania. The company was called Metro Distribution, and on paper it was a legitimate business that moved pallets of bottled water, paper towels, and canned vegetables to grocery stores across the Northeast. In reality, the third shift ran an entirely different inventory through the backloading bays. Bricks of heroin pressed into hollowed-out candle wax, and later fentanyl capsules packed inside stuffed animals headed for flea markets. I knew this because Danny Coulter didn't exist. I was a detective with a joint federal task force. And I had been inside that building for almost a year, wearing someone else's name like a coat that never fit right. The assignment started in March of 2018. My handler, a man I'll call Paul, had told me at the outset that the people we were targeting weren't the kind who sent strongly worded letters. They were connected to a cartel cell that had pushed north from Texas, and they'd already been linked to 2 unsolved disappearances in the Lehigh Valley. My job was to get hired, keep my head down, and slowly work my way into the inner shipping chain so we could trace the supply back to the distribution hub and shut it down at the source. I was given a cover identity that was so thoroughly constructed, it came with a fake high school transcript, a fabricated employment gap explained by a sick mother, and a prepaid phone loaded with a handful of burner contacts who would answer if anyone ever checked. I dyed my hair dark, grew out a beard that I shaped differently every week so my face wouldn't settle into a single recognizable pattern, and I started wearing glasses with clear lenses. They made me look softer, more forgettable. That was the point. For the first 6 months, everything went according to plan. I was careful. I arrived on time. I ate lunch alone in my car. I never asked questions that fell outside my job description. And I never reacted when I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. The guy who ran the operation on the ground was a shift supervisor named Rudy, a heavy-set man in his late 40s who wore fleece vests year-round and had a habit of clicking his teeth together when he was thinking. Rudy didn't trust anyone, but he did appreciate people who didn't talk. And I'd made a point of being the quietest person on the floor. Eventually, he started giving me small extra duties. Things like helping move a pallet to a staging area that wasn't on any inventory log, or locking a particular bay door after a truck pulled away. I did everything without hesitation. I never wrote anything down. I recited everything to Paul during our weekly check-ins, which always happened in a laundromat parking lot 30 miles from the depot, and I never kept a single piece of physical evidence on me. The first thing that felt wrong happened on a Thursday night in mid-October. I was working a double shift because another guy had called out sick, which was something I'd done before without incident. Around 2 a.m., Rudy sent me to the break room to grab a clipboard. He said he'd left on the microwave. The break room was on the far side of the warehouse floor, past a row of floor-to-ceiling shelving units that formed a narrow corridor with flickering fluorescent tubes overhead. The lights had been doing that for months, buzzing and flickering in a way that made your shadow jump in the corner of your eye, and I'd long since stopped paying attention to it. I walked through, grabbed the clipboard off the microwave, and was turning to leave when I noticed something that shouldn't have been there. Tucked underneath the edge of the fridge, barely visible, was a photograph. I pulled it out. It was a 4x6 print, the kind you'd get developed at a drugstore, and it was creased down the middle like someone had folded it and stuffed it in a pocket. The image was taken at night, and the quality was grainy. Shot from a distance with a zoom lens, maybe, or a phone camera pushed past its limit. It showed the front door of my apartment building. Not the warehouse, not the parking lot, not the gas station down the street. My building. The one where I paid rent under a third fake name. The one I had never mentioned to a single person at work. The one I drove 45 minutes to reach every night through a maze of back roads specifically chosen to ensure I wasn't being followed. My building. My door. Taken from a low angle, maybe from a parked car across the street. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible behind the glass of the front entrance, there was a blur that looked like the shape of a person standing in the vestibule. I stood there in the break room holding the photograph, and I could feel my pulse in my temples. My brain started running through the possibilities. Maybe someone at the depot had seen me come and go and gotten curious. Maybe one of Rudy's guys had run my plates as a precaution and followed me home. But I had never driven directly from work to my apartment. I always took a circuitous route, sometimes looping through an entire neighboring town before heading back, and my car was registered to a shell address that fed into a mail forwarding service Paul had set up. There was no clean way to connect Danny Coulter to that building unless someone had physically tailed me without me noticing, and I had been trained to notice. I told myself I was overthinking it. I've told myself that a lot over the years, and it's never once been true. But I had to believe it that night because the alternative was that my cover was blown. And if my cover was blown, I wasn't going to make it out of that warehouse. I put the photograph back under the fridge exactly where I'd found it, and I walked out of the break room with the clipboard. Rudy was in his office with the door half open. I handed it to him without a word. He clicked his teeth twice, glanced at me and said, "You look pale, Danny. You eat something bad?" I said I thought the leftover meatloaf from the cafeteria had turned. He laughed, a short, dry sound, and told me to drink some water and walk it off. I went back to my forklift, and I spent the next 4 hours scanning every face I passed, looking for any glance that lasted a half second too long. Nothing happened for 2 weeks after that. I nearly convinced myself the photograph had been some kind of prank, or a coincidence, or a warning meant for someone else entirely. During my next check-in with Paul, I told him about it. He asked me to describe the photo in detail, and then sat in silence on the other end of the phone for a long 10 seconds. Then he said, "We're going to keep you in place. Pulling you now would burn the operation, and we're too close to the supplier to back out. If you feel a shift, you call me immediately, and we exfil." A shift. That's exactly what happened, and it happened fast. The week before Halloween, Rudy pulled me aside at the start of the shift and told me he needed me to ride along on a delivery. This was new. I'd never been asked to leave the depot before. He said the regular driver had gotten into a dispute with someone at the receiving site, and Rudy wanted a second person in the truck for the next run, just as a precaution. He handed me a slip of paper with an address in Scranton and a time, 3 a.m. sharp. I said, okay. That was the only acceptable answer. I don't know how to explain this, but as soon as I climbed into the passenger seat of that unmarked box truck, something felt off in a way I hadn't felt since my early days on the force. A kind of primitive, cold tingle at the base of my skull that bypasses logic entirely. My gut already knew something was wrong before my brain had a single piece of evidence. The driver was a guy named Leo, who I'd seen around the depot but never spoken to directly. He was a quiet guy, late 30s, with a shaved head and a tattoo of a rose on the back of his right hand. He didn't say much. He just started the engine, pulled onto the highway, and stared straight ahead at the road. About 20 minutes into the drive, Leo turned onto an exit I didn't recognize. I didn't say anything. I had learned not to ask questions, but I was mentally tracking our route, and I knew the Scranton address Rudy gave me was supposed to be off Interstate 81, not this narrow, unlit 2-lane road with nothing but dark farm fields on either side. The road curved once, twice, and then the pavement gave way to gravel. We passed a collapsed barn and a rusted water tower, and then Leo pulled the truck onto an overgrown dirt path and killed the engine. Silence. Total, absolute silence, except for the faint tick of the engine cooling down. I sat there for a moment, waiting for an explanation. Leo didn't move. He just stared forward through the windshield with both hands on the wheel. I said, "Everything okay?" He turned his head slowly toward me, and his expression was flat in a way that made my stomach drop. He said, "We're just waiting." I said, "Waiting for what?" He didn't answer. I looked out the passenger window and saw movement. 2 sets of headlights flicked on from somewhere behind a tree line, maybe 200 yards ahead. They started creeping toward us, bouncing over the uneven ground. I remember thinking very clearly, I am going to die here. Not as a cop, not as a man with a name anyone would remember, as a ghost, buried in a shallow grave in a Pennsylvania field, who had a job that required her to forget almost everything about who she used to be. I want to say this happened in 2019. But to be honest, the years all blur together now. I was living in a small city in Ohio, I won't say which one, and I worked the front counter at a 24-hour laundromat called Suds and Spin. It was a job I'd taken because it was simple, it was overnight, and it didn't ask any questions about my background. The woman who owned the place, an older lady named Mrs. Delgado, knew me by the name on my ID. And that name wasn't the one I was born with. I'd been in the witness protection program for a little over 3 years by that point. Before that, I had a different name, a different city, and a different life that I'm still not allowed to talk about in any detail. I'll just say that when I was 19, I was in a relationship with a man who ran a small but violent crew on the west side of Chicago. And after I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see, the U.S. Attorney's Office decided I was valuable enough to relocate. They gave me a new identity, a new Social Security number, and a one-way bus ticket to a place I'd never been. They told me not to contact anyone from my old life ever and not to use social media. I followed every rule. I didn't think about the man I'd left behind. I'll call him Ray. Because thinking about him felt like inviting him back into my head, and I needed him gone. The laundromat was a long, narrow room with fluorescent lights that hummed constantly and a row of dryers that rattled like they were trying to escape the building. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ran until 6 a.m. It was usually quiet. I get a few college kids, a few night shift workers, occasionally a homeless person who Mrs. Delgado allowed to sit in the corner and sleep as long as they didn't bother anyone. I kept a baseball bat under the counter, but I'd never had to reach for it. Most nights, I read paperbacks and listened to the radio. It was boring, but boring was what I needed. Boring meant safe. For months, nothing happened. Then one night in early October, I noticed a car parked across the street. It was a dark sedan, a Chevy, I think, and it was sitting in the lot of a closed auto parts store directly opposite the laundromat. I saw it around 1 a.m. when I stepped outside to dump a mop bucket. The car was idling, headlights off, and I could just barely make out the shape of someone in the driver's seat. I didn't think much of it at first. People wait in parking lots all the time, but the next night, the car was there again. Same spot, same time, headlights off. And the night after that, I told myself I was being paranoid. Paranoia is a side effect of living a secret life. It creeps in and makes everything look like a threat. But I started paying closer attention. On the 4th night, I positioned myself near the front window while I wiped down the folding tables. And I watched the car for almost 20 minutes. The driver never got out. The engine kept running. And at exactly 3:17 a.m., I remember the time because I'd glanced at the wall clock. The car's headlights flicked on for just a second, then off again. It felt like a signal. I don't know what for, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The next day, I walked a different route to the bus stop. I doubled back twice and cut through an alley. I didn't see anyone following me, but that didn't mean no one was. I called my contact at the U.S. Marshal's office, a woman I'll call Agent Torres, and told her about the car. She asked for the make, the color, the plate number, if I could get it. I said I'd try. That night, I brought a small notepad to work and wrote down the plate when the car appeared at its usual time. I was careful. I stayed behind the counter, bent down like I was tying my shoe, and scribbled the number on the pad. When I looked up again, the car was gone. Nothing felt right after that. I started noticing little things around the laundromat that I couldn't explain. A dryer door left open that I was certain I'd closed. A wet footprint on the tile near the back exit that didn't match my shoes. A folded piece of paper tucked under the coin machine with a single word written on it. Soon. I showed it to Mrs. Delgado, and she laughed it off, said it was probably some bored teenager playing a prank. But I've known bored teenagers. They don't write in careful, blocky capital letters like someone who's been practicing their handwriting to make it unidentifiable. The night things escalated, it was raining. One of those cold, steady rains that turns the streets into mirrors and makes everything outside the window look distorted and threatening. The car was there, as always, but tonight it was parked closer, right at the edge of the auto parts lot, angled so the driver's side faced the laundromat directly. I was alone with one customer, an older man folding towels in the back corner, when the front door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, and he kept his head angled down so the shadow covered most of his face. He didn't have any laundry with him. He just walked up to the counter and stood there. I said, "Can I help you?" He didn't answer. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie, and I flinched. My hand went under the counter toward the bat, but he pulled out a photograph and placed it face up on the counter between us. It was me. A photo of me, taken from a distance, standing at the bus stop near my apartment. I was wearing the same jacket I had worn the previous Tuesday. In the photo, I was looking at my phone, completely unaware. My heart didn't just race, it seized. The man leaned forward slightly, and I could just barely see the lower half of his face beneath the hood. He had a thin scar running from his lip to his chin. I'd seen that scar before, years ago in Chicago, on a man who used to work for Ray. He said, "Ray says hello." Then he turned around, walked out the door, and disappeared into the rain. I stood there frozen for what felt like a full minute. The older customer in the corner hadn't noticed a thing. I grabbed my phone and called Agent Torres. I told her everything. She told me to lock the door, stay inside, and wait for a patrol car. I did. But by the time the police arrived, the sedan was gone, the man was gone, and there was no evidence left except the photograph, which the officers took and later told me had no usable prints. I knew what it meant. My cover was blown. Someone in Ray's network had found me, and they'd taken the time to let me know before they did anything else. That was the part that terrified me most, the deliberateness of it. They could have hurt me that night. They chose not to. They wanted me to wait. To wonder. Agent Torres moved me again within 48 hours. New state, new name, new job. I'm a stocker at a big box store now. I rent a room in a house with 3 other people. I still don't use social media. I still don't call anyone from my old life. But I also don't sleep much anymore. Every time I see a dark sedan parked on my street, every time I hear a floorboard creak in the hallway, every time a stranger holds eye contact for just a second too long, I feel that same cold dread I felt when I saw my own face staring up at me from the laundromat counter. I don't know if Ray is still looking for me. I don't know if he ever was, or if his people just wanted to remind me that the past doesn't stay buried. I still think about it every single night. This next account was sent to me by someone I'll call Ethan. His story deals with a different kind of hidden identity, one that existed entirely online until it didn't. Back in 2021, I worked as a mid-level software engineer for a tech company I'm going to call Meridian Analytics. We built data visualization tools for corporate clients. The kind of unglamorous enterprise software that pays well and never makes headlines. I was good at my job. I was quiet, reliable, unremarkable. And in my spare time, I was Anonymous Source Echo. That was the pseudonym I used when I posted internal Meridian documents to a whistleblower forum that specialized in corporate surveillance abuses. I had stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see during a routine code review. A hidden module in our flagship product that was secretly collecting geolocation data, microphone snippets, and keystroke patterns from millions of user devices, then packaging it into profiles that got sold to third-party brokers, some of whom appeared to be government adjacent. It was illegal, it was massive, and no one outside the executive team was supposed to know about it. I sat on the discovery for 2 weeks, barely sleeping, trying to convince myself to ignore it. Then I created the Echo identity, downloaded the documents to an air-gapped laptop, and published the first batch from a coffee shop Wi-Fi on the other side of town. I was careful. I used a VPN. I used Tails, a privacy-focused operating system. I used burner accounts. I never accessed the forum from my home network or any device that could be traced back to me. For a while, it felt like I had done everything right. The posts got traction. A few journalists reached out to Echo through encrypted channels. Meridian stock dipped. And inside the office, I watched executives scramble to contain a leak they didn't understand. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A sense that I was doing the right thing. The first warning sign was small. An email appeared in my personal inbox, not my work email, my Gmail, from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained a single sentence. "We know what you did, Ethan." My name, not Echo. Ethan. I stared at that email for a long time. My personal Gmail wasn't connected to anything related to the leak. I had been so careful, but somehow, someone had made the connection between an anonymous whistleblower and a quiet software engineer in suburban Denver. I didn't respond. I forwarded the email to a few journalists I trusted, asking if they'd received anything similar. None of them had. I changed every password I owned. I ran malware scans on all my devices. Nothing came up. For a few days, nothing else happened. I started to tell myself it might have been a coincidence, a phishing email that happened to guess my name, something scraped from a data broker database. I still don't know why I let myself believe that. It didn't make sense at the time, and it makes even less sense now. The second warning came in the form of a package. It was left on the front step of my apartment building, not inside the locked mailroom. It was a small, padded envelope with no return address, and my name was printed on a label. Same font, same format as the email. I opened it in my kitchen with trembling hands, and inside was a USB drive. No note, no instructions, just a flash drive. I knew better than to plug an unknown USB into anything. I used a burner laptop I kept specifically for operations like this. A cheap machine with no hard drive, booted from a read-only Linux distro. I plugged the drive in. It contained exactly one file, a PDF document. I opened it, and I felt the world tilt. The PDF was a full, unredacted copy of the original document cache I had leaked. Not the ones I'd posted to the forum, the originals, complete with my metadata fingerprints from the day I had accessed them at Meridian. Someone inside the company had traced the leak back to my specific user account, my specific terminal, my specific timestamp. And they had mailed the evidence to my home. But they hadn't gone to the police. They hadn't filed a lawsuit. They sent me the USB in an unmarked envelope, like a message. And the message was, "We know who you are, and we can do whatever we want with that information." I didn't sleep that night. I packed a bag, I booked a hotel room under a fake name, and paid in cash. I left my phone at the apartment. I thought if I just disappeared for a few days, I could figure out my next move. But when I walked out the front door of my building at 2 a.m., there was a man standing on the sidewalk across the street. He was wearing a dark jacket, and he was looking directly at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching. I turned around and went back inside. I locked the door. I sat in the dark with my back against the wall, and I listened. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my unit. Soft, deliberate, and then they stopped. I waited for a knock. It never came. After maybe 10 minutes, I looked through the peephole, and the hallway was empty. I didn't leave the apartment for 2 days. I ordered food delivery and had them leave it in the lobby. I called my boss and said I had a family emergency, and I started checking the forum where Echo had posted. The page was still up, the documents were still spreading, but there was something new. A comment on my most recent post from an account that had been created the same day. The comment said, "Ethan, check your third drawer." My third drawer. The one in my home office desk where I kept old notebooks and cables. I walked over and opened it, and inside, on top of the tangle of wires, was a photo of me, taken from the hallway, through the peephole. I could see the fisheye distortion in the image. It must have been snapped that night when I was sitting in the dark thinking I was alone. I don't know how to explain the terror of realizing that someone had been inside my apartment while I was there. They hadn't taken anything. They hadn't hurt me. They had left the photo to let me know they could. I packed everything I could carry, and I left that night. I drove until I couldn't keep my eyes open, and I've been moving ever since. I'm in a small town now, working a remote job under a new name, living in a rental I found on a classified site. I don't use the Echo identity anymore. I don't know if Meridian is still looking for me, or if they've moved on, or if they ever wanted anything other than my silence. I still check the forum sometimes. The posts are still there. The comments are gone. I still think about the USB drive, the email with my name in it, the photo in the drawer. Someone out there knows exactly who I am. They just haven't decided what to do with that knowledge yet. And honestly, that's the part that keeps me up at night.